You're listening to the audio for QTcast Episode 2. To see the full video, go to our YouTube or see the link in our episode notes.
So these are the series of works that I'm doing, paintings that I'm working on at the moment. So all these paintings are from 2021, and I'm hoping sometime next year there'll be an exhibition where all these paintings will come together and be shown in one place.
Hello and welcome to Episode 2 of the QTcast, the official podcast for the Mark S. Bonham Center's Queer and Trans Research Lab at the University of Toronto. My name is Elliott, and I'll be your host. In today's episode, I sit down with Abdi Osman in his studio at Witchwood Barns. Abdi shows me his current works in progress, and we chat about his recent project, Shadowboxing, as well as what inspires him as an artist, respectability politics, gay cruising, and more. Abdi is one of the community leadership residents at the QTRL and a Somali-Canadian multidisciplinary artist whose work focuses on questions of Black masculinity as it intersects with Muslim and queer identities. If you missed episode 1 of the QTcast, now might be a good time to head back and check out our introduction to the lab, where you meet everyone, learn about their roles, and get the lowdown on the lab and its explorations. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and remember, you can reach us at qtcast21@gmail.com, and you can find us on social at qtcast_. Without further ado, let's check in with Abdi.
I'm working on this project, which is a film project. Basically, I consider it to be sort of like a documentary film, which focuses on one individual who's a friend of mine. I've known him for quite a few years now. And he's originally from Barbados, but came here as a young person, so pretty much grew up here in the 70s. I've actually had several conversations with him, and so what happens is, and then I got interested in his idea of kind of like spatial, queer spatiality in Toronto, where Black queer people used to hang out, and queer people in general, but I'm focusing on mostly the Black queer people and where they used to hang out. And so he's taking me through his own experiences of those spaces.
Cool. What's his name?
Rooney.
Rooney.
Yeah.
Was he on the recent conference?
Yeah.
Cool.
He was one of the panelists for
Awesome.
Shadowboxing.
Hi, me again, with some quick background info on Shadowboxing. Shadowboxing is a public installation by Toronto artist Abdi Osman that builds on his ongoing research surrounding the gaps between experiences and representations of queer cruising, space, and placemaking in the city. Visible to pedestrians without being in direct sightline, a projection of lush green park environments documented by Osman from sites across the city appears from the upper window of the Archives building, a heritage home located in what is considered Toronto's gay village. Osman's holdings and records of queer locational fortitude speak to the countless compounded sites around us where bodies have forged connections in time and space in spite of continued realities of homophobia, racism, and white supremacy that exist in Toronto and beyond. This projection is augmented by an online audio work that features local oral histories about queer cruising from the perspectives and experiences of Black, queer, and trans community members as recorded by the artist. Through the metaphor of shadowboxing as a relational, defensive, and precarious state, this public art installation invites viewers to consider some of the shifting conditions in which queer connection takes place. In this way, shadows offer and represent radical spaces involving environmental and bodily negotiations that are always site-specific. And finally, if you head over to YouTube and look up Shadowboxing panel, you'll be able to see Abdi Osman, JORIAL, and Christopher Smith in conversation around Abdi's installation, hosted by curator Ellen Walker and the Mark S. Bonham Center for Sexual Diversity Studies. You'll also meet Rooney Green, who, Abdi is just currently telling us right now, will be featured in Abdi's upcoming work. It just closed recently, right? At the Archives?
Yes, it did. It closed on November 2nd.
Cool. How was it seeing your work up there?
It was, seeing my work there was interesting because it was a different space, because the first iteration of the installation was an indoor installation,
right,
which was happening at the Gardner Museum,
right,
and so the difference between the outdoor projection and the inside installations are very interesting, but also it gave a completely different kind of sense, right?
Yeah.
I think the outdoor space, because when it was at the Gardner Museum, because it was an indoor installation, what we did is we tried to recreate a park setting. The reiteration that happened at the Archives in Shadowboxing was completely opposite, because it was projecting from outside.
Right.
So any passerbys would see, and they could just use a QR code to listen to the audio.
Cool.
Which gave it a different sense of, basically it brought it closer to cruising, right? Okay, cruising for the queer community is what I would consider it's very difficult.
Totally. It's a huge question.
Yeah,
for
it's
sure.
very difficult to explain. But cruising pretty much is individuals going to hook up for sex reasons, or sometimes it's not even sex reasons. It's more about voyeurism, right?
Yeah,
kind of like you're just interested in seeing other people have sex. From my experiences of hearing about cruising stories from different people, some of them my friends, but then also witnessing some of the cruising happening late at night, right?
Yeah.
And so what the reason I decided to do the project was, at first was I could see that cruising was kind of like dying slowly, but at the same time it was also not dying, but it was also being replaced by the apps, right?
Right, totally.
And so to me it seemed like a generational thing. So there's certain people who are really like, the cruising was basically their app.
Yeah.
Right?
Right, like Grindr or Scruff,
yeah. And for the younger generation, the apps are more like they're cruising, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of check out the person on the apps, and then see if you're interested in them based on like the superficiality.
Their short bio, their face, totally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but with cruising, it was like 1-to-1, right?
Yeah.
One-on-one. So you go around, you make the rounds in the park. You kind of like lock eyes with somebody who you're interested in, and if the same thing happens, and then that's it, right?
And it's a lot about the body language too, right?
Exactly.
Like there's these codes that a passerby might not even notice, but it's like a shift in the shoulders or like a look.
Exactly. And also because cruising was like, it has been criminalized for a long time, and so I think the body language is very important, right?
Totally.
Plays a major role, right, in terms of who you signal to and who can actually read the signal.
Absolutely. Yeah, in terms of being overly policed.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so fascinating. Did it give you a different sense of the project watching people watch the video outside, like in this kind of cruising space? Like, what did that feel like?
Looking at the installation from outside, it actually comes as close as cruising in the park. Right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of people who didn't know anything about cruising, or who maybe heard about cruising but they didn't really know what was involved, would actually get an idea of it, right? And so some of them were very curious, and some of them were like interested and intrigued, right?
Totally.
And so there's different kind of what do you call expressions that, or like there are different kind of takes that people were taking from the video, right? So like the different readings of the projections and the audio, and some people actually thought it was conversation that people would have inside, like in private, but cruising is not really a private space, right?
No, it's part of it, right?
It's not a private space, it's very public, and these conversations obviously iterations of people's ideas, or people's actually lived experiences of cruising, right?
Totally.
And so, which is very interesting, because normally you don't really hear those stories. Those stories seem to be like they happen in the park, and
they stay in the park. Yeah, totally. And there's a few historic spots in Toronto, right? That for cruising, I think Queen's Park is one of them.
Queen's Park is one of the major ones. But then the other ones, so there's Hyde Park, there's Queen's Park, there's Philosopher's Lane,
right?
U of T.
Yeah, right.
And then on top of that, sometimes what happens is, like, based on what people, the conversation, the audio, the way people are explaining to me their experiences, sometimes what happens is people would hook up in the park, but then they would move over to U of T.
Cool. Like into like Philosopher's Lane or
yeah. Because some parts of U of T, because those parts were very private. So you hook up with somebody in a public space, but then you find another public space semi-private, right?
It's like going to the bedroom.
Yeah,
totally. I love that. I'm going to direct people. Are they able to find Shadowboxing online still?
Shadowboxing, now you can only find Shadowboxing, the audio online. Okay. But not the visual. But what I would suggest for people to do is kind of, because the video projections didn't have any sound. Right. And so the sound was kind of like, the audio recording from the individuals. Right. And so what you can do is, as long as you're familiar with Queen's Park or Hyde Park, try to imagine that you're in that space while you're listening to the audio.
I really like that. Or even just put it on and walk around if you're able to. Exactly. That's so cool. I definitely want to do that. One more quick interruption. I just love this idea so much that I asked Abdi's permission to include a little bit of the audio from Shadowboxing here so that you can actually experience this for yourself. So if you're watching this video at home, close your eyes as the first bit of the audio plays and walk through a mental park and really imagine yourself in that setting. Or, if you're able to, put the audio on in headphones and actually walk through a park.
So when I think about places in Toronto where I have cruised and places that I really liked, that was my favorite spots to go look for cock, I think about Cathro Park on Church Street. I think about Cherry Beach. Cathro Park was one of my favorite places to cruise for dick. I mean, after the clubs were closed, and particularly after the barn was closed, and you were not fortunate enough to pick up somebody at the bar, then you would go to Cathro Square, and for sure you could get your dick sucked, or you could suck somebody's dick, or you could fuck somebody's ass, or somebody could fuck your ass. I mean, you had a choice of whatever. I had so much fun at Catfar's Park, fucking a nice ass, sucking a nice dick, or having my dick sucked. I mean, in Cherry Beach during the day when, it's summertime and the sun is hot, you go to Cherry Beach and, men will be laying out there all naked, waiting for dick, waiting to get their cock sucked or their cock played with. I mean, many a times I would go to Cherry Beach in the summer, rollerblade, and the man would just be there, no inhibitions, just waiting to have some good sex. I love these two places because it was so much fun.
Remember, if you want the full audio of Shadowboxing, head to the link in the episode notes. Now, while you were doing some mental cruising, Abdi and I were discussing the precarity of cruising spots in the city. Let's get back to it.
Because surveillance, different people get surveilled differently. And the reason most of the Toronto parks are actually are being gentrified and kind of like cleaned out is not only to get rid of the homeless who sleep there, but it's also to get rid of these cruising spots, right? Yeah. Because the more the city is gentrified and people move in from elsewhere, they find that as a nuisance, and because of what I consider to be respectability politics, right? Totally. And so a lot of the people, even and this also has something to. It's not non-queer people only. It's also queer people, right? Queer people from a particular kind of like status or class, who also feel like this is beneath them and should not be.
Like white, rich, gay man who works for like TD or something. Like just to throw an example out there. Yeah, no, totally. And it's like, and then there's I think there's a drive for people to like line up with the politics of respectability and then say like, that's not me, I'm queer, but that's not my kind of queerness, right? And like set this distance.
Exactly. And the kind of shaming of certain practices.
Totally.
Yeah.
What about future projects? Do you have anything that you can talk about? Or
actually, at this point, during COVID, I've just been doing a lot of drawings, which I
beautiful.
call COVID drawings. So, and there's some paintings that I'm doing as well. So the COVID drawings, I started doing those because most of my work involves people, and because I couldn't hang out with people, I couldn't meet with people in person because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I switched my my practice and went back to things that I used to do before. Because I think as an artist, you always have to evolve, right?
Totally.
You can't just be stuck in one thing. And that's why I don't consider myself to be, I don't call myself a photographer or video art person. I call myself a multidisciplinary. Because
don't put me in a box.
Yeah,
totally.
Because I feel like at times I want to draw, at times I want to paint, at times I just want to do photography, and the other times that I just want to do audio and not even photography and not video. And so I think the different elements of art that that people can take from my work, and my work is very accessible as well, right? And so that's why whenever I have an exhibition, like a photographic exhibition, I like to juxtapose that work with a video, so that people who might not really, because you can look at an image and look at the image and say, okay, so this is a beautiful image. But I like to also like to document the behind the scenes of what's happening, right? So it gives the images a different layer.
Absolutely. And I think there's such a two-dimensionality that we're all really used to, especially with social media. Like you see something and literally what you see is what you get. Yeah, absolutely.
Most of my work is created based on not only my lived experience, but also people who I know, or I know of them, but also not only knowing of them, but we also have this kind of relationships, right?
Totally.
And so I want to document certain aspects of Black people, whether it's has something to do with race or class or gender and sexuality, but also in terms of diasporic movement. And so those are the things I'm interested in. So when I talk about documenting Black queers, I'm also thinking about as they intersect, like Black masculinity as it intersects with Muslim and queer identities. I'm also interested in that because I'm Black, right? But I'm also Muslim, right? And I'm also queer, right? So so a lot of people can't really associate those three things.
Yeah.
And so in my work, I try to document other people who are similar to myself, who also have the same kind of experiences, and try to bring the experiences to almost like a global or local community, right?
I love that.
And so for me, the documenting it's almost like archival work, because I know a lot of people like to talk about things, but then they feel like, okay, so I'm going to do a documentation of this, or I'm going to photograph, I'm going to make a video, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, totally.
For me, it's an ongoing process, right? And so that's why sometimes you see repetitions of the same people in my work.
Cool.
And the reason you see that is also because I have formed kind of long-term relationship with these people. It's not just I just didn't meet them yesterday and then decided to photograph them.
And then you leave.
Because I also see the benefits of doing that.
Yeah.
Because you also have to make people comfortable, people relax, people get to know you more, right?
Totally. There's a trust there, right?
And then there's trust, yeah. But also people like to view themselves the way they would like the world to view them, right?
Totally.
And so what happens is you don't just photograph or document people and then just go and show the work without any feedback from those same people, right?
Which happens far too often, in my opinion. Yeah.
And I find when you engage in that kind of practice, your work is not very sustainable because obviously people talk, right? And they're like, okay, so if you took a photo of me or you interviewed me for something, and then all of a sudden I see it somewhere and you haven't seen that work before, I can get really pissed off because maybe that's not how I wanted to see myself in public, right?
Absolutely.
But so the involvement is usually it's engaging with the individual that I work with, show them some of the work before it goes to an exhibition, make decisions together to see what they feel comfortable being shown and what they don't feel comfortable being shown. Yeah. Because sometimes an artist might feel comfortable showing something, but that is not the same as the person they photograph. Yeah, totally. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think coming to this balance is very important for me, and that's why I think as an artist you have to keep that in mind constantly, and not just think about what you like, because the work is not really about you.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
And so I think that's the most important advice that I could give to like an artist is build relationships, confidence, trust with people that you're working with.
Yeah.
And what happens in that case, when you have that kind of relationship, also you end up not having to work too hard to find people, because the same people that you work with are also going to give you refer to other people, friends of theirs. And that's why sometimes the people who have never been met are meeting them for the first or second time, and they're interested in participating in the project. It's not because of my relationship with them, because I've just met them once or twice, but it's their relationship with people who they've known longer, who've worked with me.
Yeah, totally. You're a trusted figure, and they feel like they can come to you, and you will represent them the way that they would like to be represented.
Exactly.
Yeah. And our representations are so precious, and it's so easy, I think, especially again with social media, to forget that, and how much our image is just kind of circulated online. But there's such a powerful politic to that, especially with identity, and it needs to be handled correctly.
Exactly.
Yeah, and with respect. So I love that. I'm also really interested in how your work is driven by exploring the realities of Black and Muslim and queer and the intersections of that. And those are your identities as well, but it's also like you're saying, the work isn't about you. So how have you ever been curious to put kind of autobiographical narrative into the work you're doing?
And so I think if you go back to the earlier work that I did, this are self-portraits. And so sometimes I put myself as a subject in the work to just kind of run through an idea that kind of, it does not only affect me, but it also affects a lot of other people.
Right.
And so if you look at the series, Discover series of the triptychs of myself and others as well. And so that work, you see, people can read them different ways, right?
Yeah.
And so even now, even though that work I did in 2007, it's still relevant to today, right?
Totally.
Because of the surveillance, who do people assume or think when they think of a Muslim man, right? And what is man, right?
Yeah.
But also, what is Muslim? Because the narrative that we always get here in North America or in the West, every time people talk about Muslims, they always talk about the brown Muslim, right? Rarely do you hear any Black Muslims, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's the Black Muslim who gets a major backlash, right? So you get not only Islamophobia or homophobia, but you also get Islamophobia, homophobia, but you also get the anti-Blackness, right? On top of that, right? So there's different layers of things that happen to a Black body, right? Who's Muslim, queer, right?
And the assumption to it of when people think of Islam, they think of it as anti-queer and oppressive towards so many of those identities, right? And oppressive to women, and that's just not the case.
And that's just not the case, right? And because people, and that's why when I said most of the time when people talk about Muslims, they always talk about brown Muslims, right?
Yeah.
And everything that the brown Muslim community does, or even sometimes has nothing to do with religion, it's more about culture, right?
Yeah.
And so I think people conflate culture and religion, right?
Absolutely,
And so they can't really separate the two, right? Because I can also say the same thing about Christianity, but I don't really go and say about that Christian, because I know there's a lot of people who are Christian, but they also have, they come from different cultures.
Yeah, totally.
And their cultural differences are very different based on where they come from or who they are, right?
Absolutely.
And so just because they're Christian, I'm not going to conflate the two and say, okay, so your culture is doing this, so because you're Christian, all Christians are doing that.
Literally, like when you see like an attack from a white person who's a Christian, the media isn't like another Christian extremist attack. It's like that person gets a name, that person gets a backstory. Like it's just, totally.
So I think those are the kind of subjects and topics that I try to deal with in my work, right? They can be local, but they're also universal.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What is something that you hope to bring to the lab or achieve through working through the lab, with the Queer Trans Research Lab?
It's not more about what I want to achieve, but by working in the queer and trans lab, I think it's just the idea of kind of like getting to know other people who are working on different kind of, they might be similar subjects or similar kind of theme,
right.
But very different from yours. And you also get to learn a little bit of some things that you didn't know, and they also get to learn from you. So you learn from each other, right? And that's what I think when I think about the collaborators and people who are all in the lab, even though they're working in different projects, but I think the project kind of intersect in different kind of ways.
Totally.
Which for me is the most important part, right? And interesting part.
I love that. And it becomes like one big project with all these different little aspects to it, right? I have to say too, this is totally off topic, but like I've known of your work for a while, and when I was like a baby queer, my visual studies was so inspired by the stuff you were doing and how it spoke to narratives of structural inequality and also highlighted people in our community. And like it's just, I don't know, I'm just like fangirling over here that I'm even sitting here. So thank you so much for doing this. I remember specifically it was your Labib, I believe it was. Yeah. Do you mind just speaking a little bit about that? Because I know it's been a few years.
Yeah. So Labib, what actually, because before Labib, I was actually working on another project. And so I decided I was going to put that project on pause because it was taking too long. And this also goes back towards like forging relationships.
Yeah.
Right? And I decided, you know what? I'm from Somalia. There are all these queer people in Somali queer people who I know in Toronto. Nobody really talks about them, right? And in terms of, and more so even trans people, right? You hear about trans people, we see them, obviously, because we know them, we're friends with them, but then nobody really talks about them in terms of them existing even, right?
Totally.
And so with Labib, what prompted me to do that project is because I was thinking about the word itself. And I'm thinking, okay, so this word is not really English. It's very Somali, right? But also, the word also means transsexual or transgender.
Right.
Or transsexual, transgender, transvestite, right? Those are the terms that the word Labib means, right? Or stands for. But so hearing that, and I'm thinking, okay, so if this word already existed, so this is not a new phenomenon, right?
Right.
So why is it that all of a sudden people feel like
it's a trend or it's
a trend or it's something that's just happened, right? Because people are here. And so I tried to go through that approach and and that's why I ended up actually naming the series Labib.
I love that.
And also thinking about my Somaliness and the late Somalian Somaliness, right? And trying to put the thing together. And that's why I would, there's some images of her just like, I'm like, you could be Western, you could dress in a Western outfit, but you can also dress in a traditional outfit, right? And so when we think about clothing, for me, clothing is just drag. Like every day we wear something that sometimes we're not even wearing for ourselves, we're wearing for what other people would think of us.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And so I said, okay, so if you have somebody dressed in different kind of ways, why are we always stuck there, right? In terms of dress.
Totally.
Right? Because the dress does not really reflect who the person is, right? Sometimes it's just an expression.
Yeah, and it can change. It doesn't mean that you're that person forever, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so and that's why I decided to do also a vid. So I had like different images of Sumaya in different traditional outfits, right? But also in very kind of contemporary Western outfit. But I'm also thinking, even the word contemporary too, contemporary is like when we talk about Western, we think of contemporary, but there's also Somali contemporary, right? So if you look at Somali vintage photographs, the kind of dressing has kind of changed. drastically, right? And sometimes when I look at vintage photographs, I think also as, oh my God, this should be now and not back then, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so the evolution of even outfits has kind of changed in different cultures, right? It's not the same. So just because you're wearing something doesn't mean it's not contemporary. So it could be contemporary. It might not be contemporary to the Western person, but it's contemporary to the person who's living there.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
And the other reason also I ended up having that little clip of the video, the diptych of Sumaya was also to prove that point, right? So to like reinsert her into the culture as well, right? Because it seems like people remove queer and trans people from the culture, but I'm reinserting them because I'm also using the title of what actually means to be trans, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for that. I'm so glad that I asked you. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 2 of the QTcast at the studio with Abdi Osman. Make sure to check out Abdi's work online, and remember, you can still listen to the full audio from Shadowboxing if you just follow the link in the episode notes. If you want to get in touch with us at the QTcast, email qtcast21@gmail.com or follow us at qtcast_. And finally, if you're interested in learning more about the QTRL, you can check out our page on the Bottom Center's website. You can find that link in the episode notes as well. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the show. Until next time, folks.
Okay, so what inspires me is like ordinary things, right? Everyday ordinary things that happen in life, right? Whether it's through my lens or through the lens of others. And just seeing that is what kind of pushes me to do the kind of work that I do.
Cool. That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for this.